take it to the next level because we have our keynote speaker, Professor Duchess Harris. She is a professor at Macalester College. She is absolutely phenomenal. If you could take the time to read her bio in your brochure, you'll be super impressed. Please come and join us on the stage. Professor Harris will talk to us about, or give a presentation on Black Lives Matters.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I've never spoken after James Brown. That's some good stuff. So today what I want to talk about is raising our children in the era of Black lives. And this is critically important to me. I'm a mom. I have 3 kids. I have a 17-year-old, an almost 13-year-old, and a 10-year-old. And before I get started, I want to make sure that I thank Ms. Jackie Cooper for inviting me and the leadership from African American Leadership Forum for having me back. They had me in July as well. And so I'm deeply appreciative for being here. So what I'll start off with basically is what happened yesterday. So as we know, the chief of police in Minneapolis said that the officers who were involved in the Jamar Clark incident did not violate Minneapolis police policies. And so, you know, this is extremely emotionally distressing for a lot of us. And so what I would like us to think about is that incidents like this are detrimental for our minds and our bodies and our spirits. And so in the last few years, I've been asking myself, what kind of contribution can I make to this project? And so I've been thinking that for me, I have to get out of my comfort zone. And so my comfort zone is higher education. I've been on the faculty in Macalester for 22 years. That's where I spend most of my time when I'm not home. And so I challenged myself and said, it is time to leave the ivory tower, right? I mean, it's an important thing to do. And, you know, it's not the easiest thing to do for someone like me, but I said, you know, this is the moment. And so how I chose to do that was still within an academic realm, but what I wanted to do was reach out to younger people. And so I got involved with this project where I ended up becoming the co-author of this book, which is entitled Black Lives Matter, and it's aimed at 6th to 12th graders. And I have to say, so the book turned a year old this week. This has been a whirlwind of a year. Being a part of this project has really changed my life, and I honestly can't take credit for this book because it wasn't even my idea. And so to get started, I think I should tell you the story of the book. In April of 2015, I was contacted by this publishing company located in Edina, and they asked me if I would like to be a content consultant for the book. Essentially what that means is that an academic does some fact checking, they give you a few $100s, and you go on about your life. That ended up not really working for me. The woman who originally was writing the book was a journalist from Florissant, Missouri. And she had been covering Ferguson, but her first draft of the book, I didn't feel historicized this narrative. And what I mean by that is that she didn't even include information such as Dred Scott was from the area where Michael Brown was killed. And so I thought, we really need to understand Missouri. So I eventually ended up becoming the co-author of the book. So the company was fine with that. Sue Bradford Edwards was fine with that. They brought me into this project, and we finished it last summer. By the time we were done with it, the media relations person at Macalester said, you know what, they don't have a lot of news going on in TPT Almanac. How would you like to join their show? There'll be a message from Mayor Betsy Hodges, a message from Mayor Chris Coleman. Why don't you promote your book? I said, this sounds wonderful. Now, this was very early because the book was not supposed to come out until January of 2016. But I said I'll do a little promo. Kathy Werzer was very welcoming. I got a good amount of time. I felt very good about the interview, and so did the people at McAllister. Now, just when you think life's going fine, what could possibly go wrong, right? I'm thinking, this is no problem. Everything becomes a problem. Because conservative African-American pundit Larry Elder decides to go on national Fox and Friends and do an entire segment on this book, which has not even been released yet. And Larry Elder says that this book is indoctrinating children to believe that black people are victims and white people should feel guilty. Here we go, okay? So Abdo Publishing contacts me and says, is there something you know we don't know? Because there is no book yet. It hasn't gone to the galleys, it hasn't been typeset, we haven't chosen the photos. And so let's just deal with some facts. No one has read the book. It's only August. The book isn't supposed to come out until January, but because now there ends up being a war in Twitterverse, it's rushed to October. And so, what is really the truth behind the book? The purpose of the book is not to indoctrinate white school children. Now, I know I don't have to tell you all that, but I run into people all the time that say, I don't like the idea of this book. I don't like the idea of talking about Black Lives Matter, and I don't think children should discuss these things. Okay? Now, I have a problem with that because children know what's going on, and we need to have a conversation with our kids about what's happening in our country right now. And so, what is the book actually trying to do? It's trying to answer this question. And so these are two black women who are educational studies professors. And they were at a national meeting and they just said, how can we have a curriculum that centers the belief that black life actually matters? What would it look like? And I don't think that's a controversial question at all. But this is the kind of thing that school systems are very resistant to. So I've spent the last year talking at schools saying, how can you teach about what's happening right now in 2016? How can we frame this issue of Black Lives Matter? And so what I've said is that, first of all, we need to put it in a historical context and go between Reconstruction and Brown versus Board of Education. And all of it can be done by looking at both hope and the despair that we experience as a community. Thank you. So during this time period, the hope, of course, is that we are finally emancipated. Now, I frame it that we are emancipated. We are not freed because people cannot free you. We free ourselves. We free the insides of ourselves. We free our minds, our bodies, our spirits, and we do that for ourselves. Abraham Lincoln did not set us free. Okay? And so this is a moment of emancipation. But the 13th Amendment does not make it so that we are free. Now, one of the things that is missing in K through 12 education, which is the problem when students come to me as undergraduates, is that there is hardly anything in the curriculum about Reconstruction. No one understands Reconstruction. So when I ask young people how long did slavery last, they'll say 65 years, 37 years, 28 years, because it'll go down every time I keep staring at them. It won't go up, right? And so this is just your little elevator speech. When someone says to you, why are they so angry, right? Why are they so angry? We are so angry because we were enslaved 246 years, and then we had legal segregation for 58 years. Okay, that's the other piece of it that people don't seem to really understand, right? They say, well, you were free. No, the black codes replaced the slave codes. And it's federal federal legislation, it's what our country decided. And so people have no concept of housing. They don't realize that we didn't get fair housing until 48 years ago. And that is critical. People think that we have chosen to live the ways in which we have lived, and not that we have been forced to live in the ways in which we live. And so if we move forward, then we need to teach the time period between the civil rights movement and Bill Clinton's administration. Once again, hope and despair. What is the hope? We get some assistance from the federal government because we get a Civil Rights Act, and then we get this Fair Housing Act that I have to underscore the dates, right? My mother is still alive. She is 80 years old. She lived in segregation until she was 35 years old. The Fair Housing Act did not pass until the year before I was born. My older brothers and sisters grew up in segregation. My two oldest brothers and sisters could not go to amusement parks in the state of Virginia because they were not allowed, even though the commercials were on TV. And so when my dad tried to take them, the guard at the amusement park puts his hand on his holster and says, "You need to turn around." People don't know that, right? People think this was so very, very, very long ago. The other thing that people don't know is that people think that the federal government did everything for us. Well, we have subjectivity and agency. We did some things for ourselves, right? What we did for ourselves is that we had our own Black arts movement. Not only did we have a civil rights movement, we had a Black power movement. We had a movement of Black feminism, which is critical because the founders of Black Lives Matter were 3 young Black women. These are the things we did for ourselves. We didn't need other people to do everything for us. And so when we get into the 1970s and we start saying, "Say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud," right? And we get some resistance, we get some art, we get Ntozake Shange getting For Colored Girls on Broadway, we get Alice Walker writing The Color Purple. We have all these things happening and we feel good. Well, we're gonna get the resistance and we're gonna get the pushback. And then we're going to have our despair once again, because now you're going to get the Reagan-Bush administrations. And what does President Reagan do? President Reagan invents language that had never existed before. The lexicon welfare queen, those two words put together, welfare and queen, had never existed until they came out of his mouth. And what he did was say the welfare queen is an inner city Black woman who is living off the dole. He creates resentment. He says when you go into the grocery store and you buy ground beef, she is going to take her food stamps and she is going to buy steak. And that is what's wrong with our America. Also, when Ronald Reagan runs for president the first time in 1980, he declares his presidency in Neshoba County, Mississippi, which is where Sherner, Twain, and Goodman were killed. And so he talks about states' rights. Now, people like to say that Donald Trump is new. Donald Trump has a handbook. Okay? So when Donald Trump says, "Let's make America great again," all he's doing is doing what Ronald Reagan did in 1980, when Ronald Reagan said, you know, this is our America. And he's not talking about us. Okay? Papa George Bush does the same thing. Now, if you think that I'm going to be in a moment of being particularly partisan and saying, you know, well, it's the Republicans that did all this, you don't know me very well, because I'm about to go in. Here's the Clinton administration, okay? And so the Clintons are forced to be moderate. They end up being the most moderate Democrats that there are in recent history. They aren't FDR, they aren't LBJ. And so what Bill ends up doing is the only way he can win, people say, "We don't trust any of you all, you're too soft on crime. You know, you believe in those benefits." So what does Bill do? He introduces the 1996 Welfare Reform Act, and then when he does that, he holds a press conference. And who does he have stand next to him? And he says, look what I am doing for them. Now, what everyone in this room knows is that the primary beneficiaries of welfare do not look like these women. Okay? Now, I was just in my car yesterday. I drove 150 miles to Breezy Point, Minnesota. I'm here to let you know, I think those are the recipients of welfare. Okay? And none of those people look like me. So that brings us to this moment here. This brings us to Black Lives Matter in the age of Obama. Okay? Now, I know I was a part of this a little bit. Some of us got emotional. We got emotional in 2008. And we were looking for something from Obama that was more than a president. It was more than the Oval Office. It was more than hope and change. We were looking for a Messiah. Okay? And when Angela Davis said that, I said, ooh, girl, you're right, but I'm still going to cry that night. Right? I cried, right? My husband was like, it's too much, Dutch. It's too much. He's like, I think you're expecting too much. And I was. And so I was one of those black people that during his first term, I was slightly disappointed. I was like, come on, man, say something about race. Come on. You can do it. You can do it, right? I'd read Charles Blow's articles in the New York Times, and Charles Blow would be like, he's not doing it. He can't do it. And so what really happened was that he's caught between Barack and a hard place. That's what happens. His entire first term, he doesn't know how to navigate race. And so he ends up stumbling. And the moment when people try to push him to talk about race is this moment where you have over here, this is Dr. Henry Louis Gates, who is the head of African American Studies at Harvard University. Now, Henry Louis Gates is the founder of TheRoot.com, which is a website that goes with the Washington Post. And he personally had given as much money to the Obama administration that's legally possible. And then he got the Black literati to join in with him and give a whole bunch of money to the Obama administration as well. Now, if you know anything about Skip Gates, he has an enormous ego. And so he was traveling back from an international trip. He gets to the porch of his house in Harvard Yard, and he can't find his keys, and he struggles getting into his house. One of his neighbors sees him and calls the police and says, there's a black man, I think he's breaking into this house. And so Skip eventually finds his keys, gets into the house. By the time the police show, he's actually in his home, on the other side of the door. They arrest him anyway. So what does Skip do? He gets legal counsel, who happens to be Charles Ogletree. And so they go to the police station, and Ogletree calls Obama and says, you know what? I know you haven't helped those black people in Detroit, but this is us. And you will say something. You will do something, because we helped put you there. Right? And this is one of the problems that we have in the black community, right? That it's like we don't know how to act. So we get $10 and we think we're somebody. And so here goes Ogletree and here goes Skip Gates talking about, you know, we're not like those other black people. Do something for us. And so this is what puts him between Barack and a hard place, because then Obama comes forward and says, well, the police acted stupidly. Well, then, of course, the police are like, oh, no, you're not. We're public servants. You're not going to talk about us like this. And so, doing what some folks can do, he takes the easy way out and says, well, maybe we'll just like sit in the Rose Garden and have a beer summit and try to work it out. Well, this left everyone dissatisfied. And so he ends up, of course, getting reelected, but leaving that first term with like a bad taste in some people's mouths because they feel like he hasn't pushed hard enough. When he gets into his second term, that is when Obama has a moment where he says, I now will speak about race. And we know what that moment is. That is the moment of Trayvon Martin. That is when Obama says, enough is enough. I'm going to come forward. So he goes and stands in the same place where he has the beer summit, and he says, if I had a son, he'd look like Trayvon. I think all of us have some soul searching to figure out how something like this could happen. Now, when George Zimmerman is acquitted, that is a moment, right? That is a moment, and we have tremendous racial divide. So the Washington Post does this poll where 86% of black Americans are enraged because Zimmerman is set free. But only 30% of white people feel this way. Now, I teach people who are 18 and 22 years old, and they're pretty idealistic, and so they are surprised by this data. Now, I'm looking out in the crowd, and I kind of can figure out what the age group is. Most of us remember OJ, okay? This divide is just what we do as a country. Anytime there is a big racial uprising, you have most of white America saying, why are they angry? I don't understand, right? And then you have black people saying, we're enraged. Now, people ask me all the time, how long has Black Lives Matter been going on? Some people feel like this has been going on a really long time. Other people feel like just day before yesterday. I don't know. Black Lives Matter starts at this moment. It has been going on for 4 years. And it starts as a hashtag before it becomes a movement. It starts as a hashtag because these 3 young black women get on the Twitterverse. And what they do is say, George Zimmerman should not be free, hashtag Black Lives Matter. The day he's acquitted, there are more than 5 million tweets circulating around. And people start really responding to this difficult moment. It ends up turning into a protest and a movement when we get Ferguson and we get Michael Brown. Now, a lot of people ask, why Michael Brown? Part of it with Michael Brown is pretty simple. His body was on the ground for 4 hours. Now, people can argue that was a part of the procedure. You can argue that all you want. Now that we have technology, one of the issues is in 4 hours, do you know how many videotapes went out about Michael Brown's body? Do you know how many images were disseminated? How many Instagrams? How much Facebook? How many tweets? The whole world saw Michael Brown's body. Okay, and this is our contemporary version of seeing Emmett Till's body in the casket in Jet magazine. Okay, and so this is the civil rights movement with a remix. Okay, that is what we are living through. So people say to me all the time, now sometimes, my face has been on the internet, people recognize me, they'll come up to me and they'll say, I don't like that Black Lives Matter thing. I don't like those people, I don't like what they're about, it really upsets me. And so the data suggests that last year at least, more than half of America felt like Black Lives Matter was a distraction. Okay, and I want to emphasize, that's not this year, this is 2015. People are like, this is not a good thing. Now, the other thing people always ask me is, what do they want? What do they want, those people? What do they want? Do they want meaningful civil rights legislation? Do they want ending of school segregation? Do they want job training? Do they want fair minimum wage? Do they want enforcement of the 14th Amendment? Do they want fair labor? Do they want the Attorney General to have gravitas? Is this what they want? Is this what they want?
Yeah.
No, I tricked you. That's my youngest. This is not what they want. That's what the March on Washington wanted. Okay? That's what the March on Washington wanted, and that dream still has not been realized. But what's interesting is much resistance that we have to Black Lives Matter. So I'm saying last year, 55% of America thought it was a bad thing. There was more resistance to the civil rights movement. At least 60% of America thought that the March on Washington was a bad idea. And so, if you look at what was called passive resistance, what was the freedom struggle, you have 61% of America being opposed to the black elite. This is the Southern black elite, people who are privileged enough to go to historically black colleges. These are the young students at the North Carolina A&T counter that are getting condiments poured on their heads because they want to have a hamburger. This is not black power. This is not Angela Davis. This is not Huey Newton. This is not Elaine Brown. This is not Oakland or the Bay Area. This is the South. These are the preacher's kids. And so we like to romanticize the civil rights movement. We like to say that we were in favor of King. Black people liked King, right? Half of white America thought that Martin Luther King was harmful. That's why he had an FBI file. So if you compare this to what we think of Black Lives Matter, until recently, only 25% of America thought that Black Lives Matter even had a point. But that was last year. So public opinion in Minnesota has begun to shift. And it really started shifting in the summer, and we know what shifted with Philando Castile, right? And so what's interesting to me is you had Republicans in the legislature that were absolutely appalled that Governor Dayton would say that this would not have happened to a white man. And they asked him to take it back, and he refused to take it back, right? Good for Dayton. Good for Dayton. And what I think is interesting about Philando Castile is that this was a moment where I did see white Minnesotans have compassion. But what I think is fascinating about that is because he was a good victim. Which is so interesting if we can, contrast that to Jamar Clark, right? Because there's a couple things going on. First of all, there's Falcon Heights. And Falcon Heights is where people live, people know people in that neighborhood, right? It's not North Minneapolis. See, Falcon Heights is where the state fair is, and you're not really a Minnesotan if you don't go to the state fair, right? And not only that, he was Mr. Phil. He was the lunch guy, and he worked at the Montessori school. And it was a Montessori school where, the intellectual property law professor at the University of Minnesota sent his kids, right? And so all of a sudden, we have a good victim. And so one of the things I want us to think about is that I would argue that racism actually is a public health issue, right? We are all going through some things. We are going through some things. And I talked to some teachers who worked at schools that were in year-round schools because Philando Castile happened in July. And so for the kids that had to go back to school after that incident, we know our children are distressed. They can't perform in school. The adults are distressed. I didn't want to go to work the next day, right? And then all the studies show that it takes months at a minimum, right? But let's just say that it takes less than a year for us to get over this. Then we start to get over this, we start to heal. And what happens? There you go. There you go. So here you are. So, this is just last week. And so it goes without saying that this is a difficult moment, right? And I'm not going to end this on this note of just, this is difficult because we have a level of responsibility, right? There is something that we can do, okay? And so I have some suggestions here. I recommend that you read this book that I have written, okay? That is no promotion for profit. I actually don't profit from this book. I have an electronic copy of this book. I can email you this book. I want you to read this book, and I want you to encourage schools to adopt this book. That will be more of a challenge than you can possibly even imagine. Because I'm here to let you know that now that this book is a year old, there's possibly one school that's using this book. So what else can we do? And I'm just about to wrap up, so thank you for your time. But what we can do is admit what we don't know. So I tend not to teach the work that I've written. Black Lives Matter is actually my third book. I don't teach my other books. I have small classes. I might have a class that has 10 students in it. So it would be awkward, you can't really get them to say what they think of the book because you wrote it, right? And so I tend not to do that. But last month I said to my students, you're gonna read this book. And I don't want you to feel like I'm being condescending because it's pitched in the 8th grade level, and I know you're fancy and you're fabulous, and this is McAllister, right? But you're gonna read this book, and I want you to tell me if you got anything out of this book. So they come back to class, and they learn 10 things from this book. And these are students that are at this incredibly competitive school, which makes me think that parents don't know this, and most adults walking the streets don't know this. And so they don't know that the Dred Scott Supreme Court decision said that a black man had no rights, which the white man was bound to respect, and that that ruling was written by the Supreme Court justice at the time. They don't know that the 13th Amendment says free unless incarcerated. Okay, and we were doing this before the documentary even came out a few weeks ago, which I highly recommend, by the way. They don't know that prison populations impact towns, and what I mean by that is a town like Stillwater ends up creating jobs with their prison. Then they end up being able to count the inmates as residents, which increases their population, and then they get congressional representation, and then they vote Republican. They did not know that some prisons are private, which means that there are economic benefits for corporations and that we can all be implicated in this. I know black people that work for Johnson & Johnson, right? We all need a job. There's no shame in that game. But if Johnson & Johnson is selling all the shampoo to prisons, then that is where we are. That is what we're doing, and we should at least know that. They don't understand stand your ground laws. So people ask me all the time, why did Zimmerman go free? Zimmerman went free because his attorney made the argument that any attorney would make if they were in Florida. That argument was, my client was scared. Then he shows a picture of Trayvon Martin. The jury is 12 women, 11 are white, 1 Latina. He looks at the jury and said, my client was scared. Wouldn't you be scared too? My client stood his ground. His client is running around out free and selling the gun that he killed Trayvon Martin with on eBay. Okay? But that's the law. So I don't agree with that, but we should know how it happened, and what we should do is figure out how to change that law. The other thing that people didn't know is the statistics of incarceration. Now, one thing that I'll say about Ava DuVernay's film, which I think is brilliant, 13, is that it does this fantastic job mostly focusing on the men that have been incarcerated. If we do not look at the women who've been incarcerated, we won't understand what has happened to our children. In the state of Minnesota, women have been on the rate of incarceration 800% since the 70s. What does that actually mean? That means that in the 70s, there was a 3-story Victorian house in Minneapolis that held every woman in the state who was being detained from Rochester to like Hibbing. Okay? Now, Shakopee Women's Prison is at full capacity in 2000. I had clients who were at Shakopee. Do you know what the problem is? 80% of them have kids. All of the ones that had kids had custody anyway. Now they're detained. Now we have an entire population of children that are thrown into foster care because both of their parents are detained. Foster care children go to college at a 5% rate. So if we only talk about men being incarcerated, we have missed the mark. The other thing is, college isn't for everybody. Everyone isn't college ready. Everybody can't afford college. A wonderful option would be the military if you could get in. But if you get caught with a bag of weed when you were 17 years old, you are not going to be able to go into the military. The other thing is that former inmates lose their right to vote in many states. Now, we are fortunate because in Minnesota, you can vote. The issue is the circle that you travel in, you might not know that. Okay? Finally, the thing that my students learned was that former inmates have to disclose that they were felons on job applications. As we know with Ban the Box, we were able to change that, but that was less than 5 years ago. Right? So, what do I want to leave you with? If you did not know this, that is fine. No one knows. It's okay. Admit it. And let's start a conversation. Thank you very much. Thank you.
And if we can transition now into the last session, which is a panel session. And I've invited Professor Harris to sit on a panel session as well. And the title of the panel session is The State of Emotional Health in Our Community. And this is something I wrote last night, but it really does reflect all of what's been spoken about and presented today. So as all of you know, we are openly encouraged to stay healthy. Most of us know the benefits of remaining healthy. And I know that during the workshops and the talks today, this was reinforced. Now, the effects of not living a healthy life are apparent to most people. It's broadcasted all over the media and clearly articulated by medical professionals. What's not so prominent in our society is the importance of maintaining good emotional health. Unlike with physical ailments, emotional health disorders like depression, negative moods, anxiety or brain fog are often disguised or labeled by those who don't recognize poor emotional health as bad or strange behavior. We typically ignore it, suppress it, or even consider it weak to admit feeling low or suffering from some form of depression or anxiety. I attended a gathering once a few years ago, and I was absolutely dumbfounded when a person at the gathering referred to people suffering from depression as being friends with the devil. And their condition is a result of them not having God in their life. So this lack of knowledge, understanding and compassion feeds the stigma around emotional health disorders. Therefore, it's not surprising that far too many people are reluctant to be open or even acknowledge their experience. So until we reach the point where we are forced to seek help, this also becomes a challenge. Because as we know, particularly as Black people, if we admit that we have a problem to ourselves and we want to seek professional help, some of us, almost most of us, cannot get access to that help. And if we do get access to that help, we have a lack of trust in the healthcare system due to our Black experience with misdiagnosis, discrimination, and the cultural incompetence of some of the healthcare professionals that are there to treat us. So what do? We do nothing, and ultimately our emotional health suffers. And it manifests in many ways that can harm us physiologically and psychologically. Did you know approximately 1/4 of African Americans seek mental health care compared to 40% of whites? So today we're going to have this discussion in our panel. We're going to build on what Professor Harris talked to us about, and that's primarily about this racial trauma that we experience. And our esteemed panelists, when I call your name, if you'd like to come up to the stage, please. We're going to explore the state of emotional health in our community. So I'm delighted to introduce to you our panelists. Their bios, again, are in the brochure. Please take time to read that. We have Dr. Reba Peoples. She's a board-certified psychiatrist from Emira Health and Wellness. We have Linda Blunt, the president and CEO of Black Women's Health Imperative, based in DC. We have my dear friend, Mr. Sam Simmons, who's a national expert and behavioral consultant focused on Black men's healing. And we have Brandon Jones, psychotherapist and consultant, who also focuses on dealing with emotional trauma, particularly for adolescents. So please give a round of applause to my panel. So I want to start with Dr. Peoples to really ground us. I think Professor Harris did more than an excellent job in talking about the racial trauma that we experience in our community still today and why that is. Dr. Peoples, Black people account for 25% of mental health needs in this country, though they make up approximately 12% of the nation's population. 2% of the nation's psychologists are Black. As a Black psychiatrist who believes in treating patients holistically and an expert in how racial trauma affects our state of emotional health today, can you please share how emotional trauma shows up in your practice and why racial trauma is still a factor today?
I think to answer that question, we first have to start out with understanding just some basic physiology. So our brains essentially have evolved to serve two purposes. The first is to survive, and the second is to make meaning of the world around us. So one of the ways that we learn to survive is by categorizing people, situations into safe or non-safe. So a stressor can be thought of as anything that really threatens to disrupt the body's natural state of safety or a state of balance. And we respond to stress by releasing certain stress hormones. So let's say you're walking in the woods and you see a snake in front of you, your body's going to release norepinephrine and epinephrine and cortisol and all of these stress hormones that help your body prepare to deal with that threat. The problem is we really can't tell the difference between a snake and an abusive partner or a boss that's verbally abusive. So in our modern society, we're constantly exposed to these stressors that trigger these stress responses. And when we have long-term exposure to stress and stress hormones, that's a setup for chronic diseases like obesity, diabetes, heart disease, etc. So when we look at how our brains develop when we are exposed to trauma, early trauma, there are 7 key areas that tend to get disrupted. So one of those areas is attachment. So the ability to form loving, healthy relationships gets disrupted. So we see things with like distrust and suspiciousness and poor boundaries. Our actual biology changes. So you can actually see trouble with coordination and balance, decreased sensitivity to pain, different what we call somatic complaints, so bodily complaints. The area of the brain that's more of the emotional part of the brain that's concerned with emotional regulation can get disrupted. So people can have trouble naming feelings or experiencing emotions, or even communicating wishes or needs. So we can see behavioral problems. So when kids are in a situation where they're stressed, you see a lot of acting out and these sorts of behaviors because of that disconnect between sort of being able to sort of fully name or understand what's going on internally. The part of the brain that's concerned with learning and memory, so the hippocampus, is also impacted by trauma. So being able to process or learn new information can be impacted, being able to plan appropriately can be impacted, and even curiosity can be impacted. We can see trouble with actually being aware of time and space, so we can see people dissociate as a way to really deal with trauma. So if you could kind of go someplace else in your mind and disappear, that's a way to really survive being a victim of any sort of abuse or violence or trauma. And probably the most heartbreaking thing is, self-concept is impacted. So we see a tremendous sense of shame and guilt. So with a child, you have to understand that their world is very self-centric. So if a child is exposed to violence or abuse, the thinking is that I did something to deserve this. I'm wrong, I'm bad. And that sense of somehow feeling less than translates and it carries over into adulthood. So we have generations of people who really don't value themselves or don't have any real sense of meaning or purpose in the world. And in terms of how how racial trauma is still a factor today, we know from epigenetic studies that environmental factors can actually change the way that our DNA is expressed. So Rachel Yehuda is a researcher who's done studies on descendants of the Holocaust survivors. And we know that in those people, there are alterations in the way that their stress hormones are expressed. And the Holocaust lasted 12 years. So imagine if Holocaust descendants have these very real changes. What's going on in people who've been victims of slavery for over 250 years and another 50 years of systemic racism and oppression. So we know from studies that Black people have disproportionate rates of chronic inflammatory illnesses like diabetes, like high blood pressure, like heart disease. And this is even when you correct for factors like socioeconomic status, neighborhood, or educational status. So there's clearly something environmental that's happening that's making us more prone to developing these sorts of issues.
Thank you. That was interesting. So what I'm hearing is that emotional trauma and stress really does affect our physiology, particularly our brain, and then that enhances the way that we feel. And one of the beautiful things about the brain is it is plastic. So whilst that does sound a bit gloomy, and I know, Linda, you don't want to talk about what's wrong with us, but the good news is that when you focus on different techniques to be more positive in your mind and address the condition you have emotionally in an appropriate way, your brain can switch back again and you can recover and it can be reversed. So, Linda, I want to move over to you because you're the president and CEO of the Black Women's Health Imperative, and as you know, mental health problems are higher than average for Black women due to the psychological factors that's just described by both Professor Harris and Dr. Peoples. And Black women are lagging behind white women in health and mental health indices. For example, the depression rate amongst African American women is estimated to be 50% higher than Caucasian women. So in your role as the president of the Black Women's Health Imperative, what do you find with the women that you see traveling around the country? How does this show up in kind of real life? And what does the Black Women's Health Imperative do to help address those challenges?
Thank you. So earlier today I asked if anybody had been stressed, and oddly, hands went up. What we're seeing now is this not only is it a way of life, it's becoming recognized as a way of life. And Dr. Peoples described it beautifully. We've all felt stress, so the fact that it affects our body shouldn't really be a surprise. I'll start with what I mentioned last year and then earlier, how Black women define health. So we've done surveys, and we continue to do surveys and ask Black women to define health. And overwhelmingly, the words that Black women use to define health are psychosocial. I'm calm, I'm at peace, I'm in control. Maybe about 10% of the words are financial. I can pay my bills, keep a roof over my head. Less than 5% of the words have anything to do with a disease state, being healthy and strong. So for Black women, health starts with spiritual and mental and emotional well-being. And they're telling us, if I can get my mind right, my spirit right, and my money right, I can take care of everything else, which I think is true. But the way we look at health, the way we study disease, the way we study public health, people in my field always look at it, almost always look at it from a medical model. What disease is being presented? And we will treat that disease. We'll treat the diabetes and hypertension the heart disease, but it never gets to the underlying cause. Because if we did, then we would see what we see. And as Dr. People said, we would see it happen generational. If your grandmother is obese, your mother's likely to be obese, you're likely to be obese, your child's likely to be obese. This thing passes through generations, and mutations take place so that we begin to adapt, and this becomes normalized for us. So when people talk about stress, and if somebody says, well, stress leads to heart disease, yeah, that makes sense, but it doesn't really mean much to people. To kind of put a finer point on it, the work we've done with the Black Women's Health Study has a direct link between experiences of racism and uterine fibroid tumors. Black women are 80% more likely to have uterine fibroid tumors than white women. So you can draw a direct line. Experiences of racism and fibroid, which then you think, well, what's the issue there with heavy bleeding, obviously, but infant mortality and maternal mortality and morbidity. So this affects not only our bodies, but our children's bodies as well. And another thing I would point out, just in media, we're seeing now higher rates of PTSD in Black women because of being able to see these videos of Black men and women and boys and girls being shot by the police. This is taking a toll on our health. And as Dr. Harris said, it takes time to recover. We never recover because it keeps happening. And so Black women, one of the things we've done is we've kind of circled the wagons, and we have all this control over our children. We think we do. We don't want our kids to be kids anymore. Well, that takes a toll on our kids, and so then they will grow up to think, well, I've got to keep my kids really close, and we never get to experience the freedom that we're still trying to experience. So I just want to kind of get you all to envision, imagine living your life every day where you don't have to worry about anything. You got a job, you're going to have a job. If you don't have a job, nobody's going to harass you on the street. Everything in your whole world supports who you are and affirms who you are and makes things easier for who you are. You just never have to think about it. Imagine that. That's called white privilege. Okay. So we don't get to experience that, and you see it in our music, you hear it you see it everywhere, where we're always compensating, we're always saying, well, if I could do this, everything is a struggle, because everything is a struggle. But imagine if everything wasn't a struggle. So that's what, at the Black Women's Health Care, we can't fix that overnight, but in our work, and our policy work, and our messaging, and our program, we start with, you are valuable simply because you woke up this morning. That is all you needed to do. And then you have the tools, you have the intelligence, you have everything you need to take the next right step to your health, and we help you do that. Because we have got to believe it, and if we don't believe it, it won't happen. So there's also a thought about men. We can't take on the burden of men. Obviously, our men have to do things for themselves, but we do have to be understanding. There's this notion of the sojourner syndrome, where we do everything for everybody. It takes its toll on us, and we have to stop. We have to do for ourselves first, and know that after that, things will take care of themselves.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Linda. So let's bring the men into the conversation. I think that's a nice segue. First of all, I want to appreciate all the men that showed up today. Can the men raise their hands? Because whilst this is about Black women, we still need our Black men. Absolutely. So, I read an article, and many of you may have read this as well, a couple of years ago, and it was entitled, Strong, Silent and Depressed. Is acting like a man bringing brothers down? And so the author of the article was trying to explore why we need to let our men deal with their emotions and how keeping them inside can be deadly. So I want to pass a question over to Sam Simmons, who, as many of you may know, is a national expert and behavioural consultant focused on Black men's healing in the areas of historical trauma, chemical dependency, violence. Plus, he's an orchestrator of the numerous successful Black healing conferences around the country. So Sam, can you share your views on how men deal with the trauma that has been so well described during the session today and during our keynote speak? And how does it show up for them? What do they feel, and how as we as women can support them without being detrimental to our own emotional health?
That's a loaded question. My take on that has been that if you think about male trauma, which we don't, okay, when you ignore male trauma, then that becomes a major problem when you don't allow men to address their pain. And historically, that's true across the board, especially here in America, but African American men are never seen as victims, right? And so if they're never seen as victims, even our little boys are never seen as victims. We've seen that play out where even after they get past 5 years old, even in the community sometimes, and we do it out of safety, is when we start talking about our little men, right? And so the thing is the systems are scared of our children at 5, little boys. And one of the things about male trauma, especially black male trauma, is very selfish, right? It shows up very selfishly because the big fear is being afraid, especially with this younger generation. Part of their masculinity is not ever showing any fear, okay? And if you spend a lot of effort to shut down your fear, then you will have your skills in terms of love, compassion, all the other kind of thing gets diminished, even for yourself. So that's one of the reasons we started even just focusing just on black male trauma. Now, how does that play out in terms of black women? Well, I think it was said that one of the things, if we look at historically, especially in America, black women, even though they didn't want to be in this position, was put in a position to care about everybody but themselves and try to keep the community intact, right? And so even when I deal with women who've been dealing with domestic violence situations, they will call me up and say, Mr. Simmons, I'm not going back with dude, but can you fix him? In the middle of her own crisis. And so black women being able to focus on their needs first is probably one of the most important things they could do, and teaching their daughters to do the same thing. Because I think we have talked a great deal about trying to save our sons, because historically folks been trying to take our sons' lives, our men's lives, right? And we got so far in trying to focus on saving them, our little girls got lost in the shuffle. They got lost in the shuffle. And then if we look at the crack era, because when I talk about historical trauma, I break up different eras. The crack era was significant because it affected black women. Black women have always been the keeper of the community, okay? And we never ever gave them the credit of being the keeper of the community. Because black men were always in and out of the community, either because of the need to go get a job, or they had 2 or 3 jobs, so they didn't always have time to have the emotional connections when they wanted to, even with their boys. I was raised with my father, right? I suffered the same trauma as some of men who weren't raised with their father, because there wasn't an emotional connection within the house, because unfortunately, because we are, just glad that we survived, just having a man in the house has been enough in some of the houses, and not having him in the house really contributing to the emotional needs. And I don't blame him for that. That's part of our response to the trauma. Historically, we have been put in terms of our existence here in America, trying to keep men alive at the cost of our black women. And then you add in this police brutality. How is a black woman supposed to call the police on dude when she ain't sure how they gonna come to the house? So she between a rock and a hard place, right? And then if she do call the police, folks in the community, both black men and black women, will chastise her for calling the police on dude, right? And so the whole piece summarized is when you ignore a whole gender's trauma, then they will traumatize you. So hurt people, even the folks they love, right? And then if we talk about the younger generation of young men right now, because of this extreme trauma, and the one piece I wanted to get to, and I was thinking about it and I missed it, is this whole thing about the focus on black men, saving their lives, you know, the extinct and that kind of stuff, and then we talk about how the single parent homes affect men, but we really haven't talked a great deal about how single parent homes really affected girls. We haven't really talked about not having men around for girls early in their lives really significantly affects how they have relationships and how they see. If you think about somebody who had a good relationship either with their father, an uncle, or a grandfather, you can't mess with her, right? Because she already knows, right? And even if she do make a mistake, it ain't gonna last long.
Should have me go first before him.
Yes, I'm sorry, Sam. Sam has a wealth of information. We can have a whole panel with Sam all by himself. But Linda mentioned social media, and Professor Harris mentioned that, and we all know that we witness all of these traumatic events through social media channels like Facebook and Twitter. And, you know, as mentioned earlier, on our doorstep we had the fatal killing of Philando Castile and also Jamal Clark. And by the way, Professor Harris whispered to me, that's exactly how Jamal Clark got killed, because his friend called the police and he ends up now being deceased. So, you know, the sad reality is that these instances are just the ones coming to the forefront, and there's many more of those taking place that we're not aware of. And when I saw Mike Brown and the body, the first thing I went to was slavery. And you know, in slavery, and I just saw the film Birth of a Nation, and you know, in slavery, when they wanted to punish a slave, they would do that in public, and they would hang and maim and do all sorts of unimaginable things and make the other slaves watch, and then leave them there as a display, as a reminder that this is what will happen to you. So this is where the trauma starts from, and this is what we're seeing with social media. We're actually witnessing the deaths of our brothers and sisters and children at the hands of those that are supposed to protect and serve, and also at the hands of people that look like us. So Brandon, as a psychotherapist and consultant, particularly with children and adolescents, what role do you think social media plays in increasing our trauma, and how does it show up in your clinic, and do you give advice on how we can manage it? Do we just turn on Facebook and Twitter? Should we look at it once a month? I mean, what are your recommendations?
Big question. I hope so. I'm hungry, so I better be there. I think that social media plays a critical role for a lot of different things. And our trauma, bigger than social media for me, is really how we process and deal with grief. We can say it's social media, but really it's a community thing that we need to work on how we grieve and how we pass on grieving to our children. As a child, when someone died in my family, not a lot was explained to me. I would just sit to go with the other kids in the basement or the other room as the adults handled all the business. And I didn't understand a lot of what was going on, and I still see the same thing happening today. Now, social media is just another medium that pushes through our lack of ability to really process grief very well. And we live in a consistent state of grief all the time. Also, what social media has done has really just put what we already have been known and seen in our communities out for everybody to see, right? So now we're being exposed, and it starts to bring things home for us. So even if we didn't have the 2 incidents that we had here in Minnesota, we still feel that pain because we know that this stuff has been happening for a long time. Now, on Wednesday evening when Philando Castile was murdered, I almost caught that on live stream. Me and Philando Castile went to high school together. He's 2 grades above me. We graduated together. We have a very close mutual friend between the 2 of us. And I'm on Facebook because I have scoliosis. I'm always on my phone. And yeah, absolutely. I have scoliosis. Always on my phone scrolling. Like a lot of us. Like a lot of us. And the reason why is because our phones help us relieve our stress. And I'm going to get to that in a second. But on that night, I'm in bed. I probably should just go to sleep, but it takes me a while because I'm doing email and I'm scrolling. And literally, my good friend, he shares the video with and saying, "I'm so hurt, I don't know what to do." So I'm like, "Whoa, what is this?" Because he's not somebody that really expresses emotions a lot. So I watched this video and I almost caught it live. And that like hit me. I'm like, wow, like what is, I didn't know what was happening. I'm trying to call him, he's not picking up the phone, so now I'm in panic mode. And I'm just like, I don't know what's going on. So I end up watching the full video and I try to go to sleep, but my anxiety's so high because I'm trying to figure out what's going on with my friend, and I'm also trying to figure out what just happened to Philando, right? So I am trained as a clinician to handle these types of matters, but when that stuff hits home, like you as a person, you are affected by that. And I had to go to work the next day, right? I was at Henry High School the next day, and first thing I'm asking my students, how are you doing? Have you seen the video? That whole week I'm asking, did you see what happened? A lot of them seen what happened. I got two very different responses, and both of them were troubling to me. One was, they seen it, they were very traumatized, and they were stressed out because of it, and a lot of frustration and anger said that they're sick of it. Now these are 15, 16, and 17-year-olds that I'm saying. The other reaction that I got was, this is nothing new. And that was the scary reaction. I had a lot of numb young people like, this is what happens. And then later on, and if we be honest, later on that weekend, 3 other people got shot over north. Like the trauma just continues, and social media is just more exposure to it. Now, social media and our technology in general is one way that we cope with our stress, right? We watch a lot of TV. There's tons of research and studies on it. We are some of the most consumed people that watch TV, and we're on a lot of social networks. It also is a form of entertainment. So I think that it's not necessarily social media itself, but it's just how we are dealing with the issues and using it, right? And I think understanding grief, understanding toxic stress, understanding different ways to de-stress ourselves is very important for us to deal with this issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's very, very comprehensive. Professor Harris, what do you think about social media and the effect it has on our trauma?
I mean, it seems to me that it has a tremendous impact on our trauma. I know that my husband watched the Philando Castile video, and then I found him tucked away in a room in our house, and he was sobbing.
Yeah.
And it was really disturbing that to see him go through that and impacted by that. And I couldn't bring myself to watch it. The question I ask myself, though, is we have a 10-year-old son, and I'm thinking 3 or 4 years from now, how would I feel if he saw something like that? And I wouldn't want him to see something like that, but I also know that I don't think I can keep him from that.
We have to be honest with our children. The internet has allowed things to just be exposed, right? And our children can see pretty much anything they want to if they know what to search. So we have to be, as parents and as community members, and we're going to have this village concept, we really have to explain things to our children better. So I think that would help.
Yeah, thank you. And so I think we're very crystal clear about the challenges that we face and continue to face. And I really want to transition into solutions. And really, today it's been about education and information, and we've been rich with that. And I want to end the day with some really key nuggets in how we can maintain a really good emotional state of well-being. You know, we had Connie doing the exercises. That was great fun. That took 10 minutes. It didn't take too much stress and strain out of our lives. That's one thing that we can do to really increase our sense of well-being. And I want to go to each and every one of the panel members and ask them what they recommend the audience to do, or what they do, what's their practice to maintain a good, healthy, emotional balance. And we can start with, Brandon.
So what I do is I get massages monthly. I'm not afraid to admit that. I get monthly massages. And I also just started working out more. I have definitely just been slacking on my health. And I'm one of those people that as long as my brain's good, if I can read books, if I can consume videos on YouTube, I'm good, and I kind of lost my physical stuff. So I've been working out a lot more, and I've been feeling a lot better since I've been working out. I forced myself to get a membership and been doing more physical activity. I also have 2 young kids, they keep me active as well. So spending time with the people that we care about is very important for our mental health as well, and making sure that we keep that connection. As much as we are on social media, internet, and those things, we do get connected with people all over the world, but sometimes we lose those intimate relationships that we have right in our homes and in our communities. So those are the three things that I utilize.
Yeah, thank you. And just to remind everybody, we don't have to go to a gym or a fitness center to work out. We can walk around the mall, we can walk around the park, we can do things in the home, just as Connie said. And it's really important to recognize that just getting up and moving on a daily basis really does have an impact on how we feel and our emotional state of well-being. Because it actually releases hormones called endorphins, which makes you feel good. So there's a physiological basis behind exercise and feeling good.
Absolutely.
So Mr. Simmons, what do you recommend? Particularly for, because your expertise is with black men's healing, particularly for black men.
Okay. Well, one of the things I had to do in terms of my stuff, in terms of decrease my stress, is to actually started being honest about my own trauma, and being honest about the trauma I caused a lot of folks in my life. Because I'm a firm believer, if I can't do it, I can't teach it. Okay, so I had to learn to forgive myself. I find in our community, as religious as we can be, forgiveness is one of the most difficult things we can do, especially among black men. Okay, most of the black men I deal with don't believe forgiveness even exists, and they'll stand up in a pew and everything else, but if you directly ask them about forgiveness, they say, I don't think it exists. And I find that real interesting. And what I also found in that is because we haven't allowed ourselves to forgive ourselves for some of the stuff we've done. Because like I said, I had to get to a point where I had to be honest about some of the things I've done, and some of the things I've done, and who the things I've done them to, and had to make peace with that so I can be with myself, okay? And be able to be calm and silent with myself. So I spend, do some of the things Brandon said, but I spend a lot of time disconnecting from the folks I work with people, and technically I'm kind of an introvert, even though folks don't believe that. But on Friday evening after my radio show, I go home and might not come out the basement until Monday, right? And I don't want nobody to feel sorry for me because I'm just fine, right? I don't watch movies that is attached to my work, so I really don't watch any trauma movies because I deal with that every day. I let my grandkids talk crazy to me because they're just like me, like my granddaughter came down in the room downstairs and said, Grandpa, I know you got all the money, but I just wanted to let you know, I know I can't get none from you, but Grandma will let me have it. So we're actually spending time teaching them how to not be stressed by how other people feel about them. Because the thing with her that bothered me, she said, why don't the black girls like me? And so we have this internal stress we need to deal with in the community. And I told her, because you're 13 and you still play with dolls, and some of them are trying to get boyfriends. And she sat there and said, ugh, boyfriends. I said, that's the right answer.
Well, it was a great answer. Dr. Peoples, I want you to bring us to the holistic approach, which I know you do in your practice of meditation, being still. Can you tell us about that and how that helps us?
Oh, sure, definitely. There's a quote by Audre Lorde that states that taking care of myself is not self-indulgence, it's self-preservation. And we have to recognize that just as our bodies need food as nourishment for our bodies, love is nourishment for our souls. So we have to be willing to love ourselves enough to take care of our bodies. And one of the ways that we can do that is to really limit any sort of inputs into our bodies that trigger what we call inflammation. So meditation is one of those ways that we can limit those inputs. But wellness shouldn't be complicated, and I think there's so much information floating around about how to stay healthy, what foods to eat, and those sorts of things. But there's a very simple acronym that you can use to help keep yourself healthy, and that's SMART. So being smart about your wellness, S-M-A-R-T. So S is sleep. We need to get adequate sleep at night. M, we need to move our bodies. A is about our mental attitude. So really taking care of all of those automatic negative thoughts that tend to run through our minds. So the average person has somewhere close to 40,000 individual thoughts in a single day. And for most of us, 65% of those thoughts are negative. So really recognizing when you are sort of heading down more of a negative thought train, because people who do have more of a negative internal thought world tend to have a more negative experience of the world in general. The R is about recognizing your greatness. So I think a lot of times we tend to attach our value to the role that we play in life rather than the person that we are. So really recognizing that you are special, you are worthwhile, you are worthy simply because you're here, not because of what you produce or what you can buy. And then the T is about targeting your inputs or tailoring your inputs. So nutrition is definitely important, so making sure that you're eating real, healthy, nutritious foods, so foods that are as close to nature as possible. Looking at what you put onto your body, so what you put onto your body is as important as what you put into your body. So making sure that you're really trying to avoid anything that's full of chemicals or additives or things that can really be absorbed and be actual cancer-causing substances. And then relationships are also important. So loving someone doesn't mean putting up with bad behavior. So you can certainly love people from a distance if they are not adding value into your life. And as far as meditation, that has been proven to alter the pathways in your brain that have to do with resilience in the face of stress. And meditation is just one of those ways. So mindful movement like Tai Chi or yoga, dance, drumming. There are many other ways that we can really help our bodies heal.
Thank you, very informative. Linda?
So I like to be very practical, and in our work we like to give women things they can do right now. So 4 things: breathing. So Dr. People talked about meditation, very important, but sometimes you can't get off and meditate. So think 7, 8, 9. Breathe in for 7 beats, hold your breath for 8, breathe out for 9. Do that 3 or 4 times, you will literally lower the level of cortisol in your bloodstream. So you will feel yourself calm down, and you can do it anywhere. Driving, in the office after that meeting with that boss, or that coworker. Second thing is make a list. Sometimes we feel overwhelmed because we're doing everything. So I literally make lists and tell them, and we talk to the women that we serve, make a list, all your stuff, and then make a list of everybody who can help you. Not people who are helping you, who can help you. And then you draw lines, and then you ask them. And the women who have done that, and myself included, have all reported not a person has said no. Think about when people ask you for help, do you ever say no? So you don't have to do it all yourself. Exercise. It'd be great to join the gym. The gym is not for everybody, but there's great exercise science out. 7 minutes. You can do 10 to 14 exercises for 30 seconds a piece. You don't need to go to a gym, you don't need weights, you don't need equipment, you don't need anything, and you can do it anywhere. Has the same benefit as a 30-minute circuit at a gym. And then I would say, probably the last thing is in the physical activity sphere, walking. Black women in the Black Women's Health Study, the women who report their health as very good or excellent, walk. Well, sometimes you can't walk for 30 minutes at a time. You may live in a neighborhood or a work environment where it's not safe to walk. Good news, you don't have to. The latest science says 30 minutes is great, 10-minute increments. 10 minutes in the morning, 10 minutes in the afternoon, 10 minutes in the evening. As long as you get that in, it has the same benefit as a 30-minute walk, so you don't have to do it all at the same time.
Wonderful. Are you going to go and walk now for 10 minutes incrementally throughout the day? Is that a yes? Yes. We have to go back to Tony's pledge at the end of this session. Professor Harris.
The last thing I'll say is just, I would like us to challenge ourselves to remove the stigma that there is in the Black community for seeking mental health services. And that's not something I'm placing on you. I will say that I grew up in a family that did not believe that it was okay to go to a professional for any kind of counseling. And it wasn't until I became an adult that I actually challenged that. And I think it's important for us to admit that sometimes we're not okay. Everyone isn't always okay. And that we should pursue the kind of expertise that's here on the panel.
Wonderful. So now it's time for questions for the panel members. Does anybody have a question?
How often should a person go back to the medical professionals to find out if they're going to continue to need this medication or not? And then if so, how can we challenge the medical system? Because once they make a prescription, they usually just expect you to take it for the rest of your life. So that's my question.
Dr. Peoples?
So the question around medication is an interesting one because our thinking around what causes depression is certainly shifting. So the traditional thinking behind depression is what we call the monoamine hypothesis, and what that means is it's a biochemical imbalance because we have too little serotonin in our brains. And when we give antidepressant medications, so SSRIs for example, those are intended to increase the level of serotonin that's sort of circulating in the brain. SSRIs are about 30% effective, so we know that there's some other factor that's contributing to depression. So the newer thinking is that there's a real inflammatory component to depression. So our brains release chemicals called cytokines that help respond when we're under stress or when there's some issue that the body is trying to work through. So by pursuing more of an anti-inflammatory lifestyle, we're able to find that people are able to recover from depression without necessarily needing medications long term. So medications certainly are beneficial in the right circumstances. So when people are suicidal, for example, or if people are having very real functional impairment as a result of their depressive symptoms, medications do have a place. But you also need to figure out holistically what's driving the depression. So taking the medication helps treat the symptom, but it doesn't get at the cause. So you want to know if there are any issues physiologically. So, has the person had their thyroid gland tested? Have they had their B12 levels tested? Have they had their vitamin D levels tested? What's the state of their gut health? Are they taking care of themselves? Are they eating any foods that are causing sensitivities? Are there any genetic issues that are causing problems? So you do want to take a more fully comprehensive approach when you are dealing with prescribing medications for people. And once people have been prescribed a medication, it depends on the age. So people who are under 25 are more likely to have suicidal thinking after taking an antidepressant. So those people should be followed weekly after the first month after starting an antidepressant, and after that, monthly until things are stable. We recommend with adults that you can start to try to taper off of an antidepressant after 6 months to a year of stability. But again, you want to get those lifestyle factors in place so that you can successfully taper off of that medicine.
Thank you, Dr. Peoples. I think we have a question here. Want to say your name first and then a question?
Hi, my name is Benita, and this is for Dr. Harris. I am one of those people that I thought the Black Lives Matter was doing too much. They was just totally ridiculous. But when I was listening to you, I learned a lot of things. And I know you talked about a book that you had wrote. So I was wondering, how can I get a hold of that book so I can read more about it?
First of all, thank you so much. It's really been my life's work for the last year at least to try to demystify some of the myths around Black Lives Matter. So I just appreciate the open-mindedness and the way that people have received me. My book can be ordered on Amazon.com. It can be ordered on BarnesandNoble.com. In town, it's at Common Goods Bookstore, which is the bookstore at Snelling and Grand that Garrison Keillor owns. It's about $25. If people don't have $25, I have an electronic version. If you email me, I'll just send you a copy of the book because I think it's just important for people to know what's in it.
Thank you. Sam, did you hear the question?
I think so.
She asked what hope are there for little girls who are lost without their fathers?
Oh. Part of the hope for them is the fact that we are starting to acknowledge that we need to do a better focus on them. And secondly, we really need to work with men in general in terms of being able to be there for their children. I mean, what I've found is that because we have ignored so much male trauma, that sometimes the trauma spills over to the kids, and so both got to go together. But the fact that we're really starting to talk about the focus on women and girls, like what she was talking about, women going to prison, that kind of stuff, I think we lost the focus. And really having a place for them to talk about that experience of not having a male role model and making it okay. Because I don't think we ever made it okay, right? We again, and I know why we, what we did in terms of boys, because it was a trauma response. When you start worrying about your children leaving the house, or your boys leaving the house and not coming back, right? Historically, that it got to be so much of a focus, and so indirectly, as a trauma response, girls kind of got ignored. It's like the whole thing about the bad kids gets all the attention, right? And so the girl goes and does what she's supposed to do, and she got her brother over there who's getting in trouble, and then on top of that, she's almost held responsible to watch out for him too. And it doesn't matter if she's the youngest girl in the house or the oldest girl in the house, she ends up doing that, right? And I think, again, I'm not about right or wrong. I gave that up for a long time. We really need to start recognizing what is, because sometimes what is don't feel good, right? And so that's why, because I believe, think about this, if women have been the keeper of the community, right? And especially of the children, because they have been the keeper of the children, if we focused a great deal of our work on young women, certain things would improve in our community very quickly in a short period of time.
That's right. That's right.
And I said this to a group of male educators in Syracuse. They were all the judges and probation officers and fraternity brothers, and I said that, and the room went quiet, and then they said, I'm not having no woman run my life and be in charge of me and all this other kind of stuff, and that was what I was saying. And when I had to explain to them what I was saying, right? How do you build up women when the thing is because of our experience in America and our trauma experience in America, we have been put in a position of calling our community matriarchal. We didn't come here as a matriarchal community. We came here in many different brands of community. We became matriarchal because of a white male did not want to deal with a black male, right? And so again, black women have been put in a position historically that she never wanted to be in to start with. Okay, so if we lose that, and we got younger parents, okay, so because the generations have shrunk, and you've got younger mothers who are competing with their daughters for the same attention, that is a major problem too, and we won't deal with that. And that's a real trauma. And again, it's not about right and wrong, it's a trauma response. See, we have to rephrase what this is and quit phrasing things as blaming, because we have been conditioned to shame each other, to put people in check. We have to rephrase things to say, it ain't about, what's wrong with me, what happened to me? And we're responding to what has happened to us as a people individually and as a people in terms of our gender. So we don't have to have women fighting like they always got to fight, as a quote from the Jim Crow narratives. The black woman said, I moved up north so I could quit being raped in public by white men and being raped in private by black men. So if they're always put in that position to be in a fighting position, even to belong in their own community, then that's not good.
Thank you, Sam. That's a very comprehensive response. Still a name question, please.
Okay. Hey, my name is Eric. I'm one of the 3 men here. So that's dope. I'm wondering is that the educational push, and so that we now know that the ladies, especially in the African American community, are very well educated and are very outpacing the men, and so that leads to economic upgrowth as well. But that's not really transferring into like the household, into like the black family being better. And so, as you said, like kind of being the wrong focus maybe on certain areas. I'm kind of seeing maybe the educational push didn't necessarily make us better like husbands and wives, because I'm 28 and a lot of people I know are single, not married still, and so I'm wondering how do you kind of bridge that gap, because we are doing better educationally as far as the community and specifically the ladies, and so what I'm wondering is that going to eventually transfer in us being better together along outside the classroom ever?
Who's going to answer? Professor Harris? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, right. Everyone can respond.
I'm brave enough. We in the same generation. I'm 30, and a lot of my friends are single too. I'm married, and that's very rare. And the questions, first I always get, you're married? I get that face, and I get, are you married to a white woman? And I say, no. So that's what I get all the time. Now that's a Minnesota thing. That's a Minnesota thing. Am I lying? All right, thank you, okay. So, the educational piece. One thing that we have bought into that was never for us is this American dream. The white picket fence, the 2.5 kids, yada, yada, yada. That was not for us. So we assume that by getting more education, that's going to improve families. We need to do more groundwork before the education even gets started. That's the issue. So we can have sisters go get, bachelor's degrees, masters and PhDs, but at the same time, if they can't find companions, there's going to be strong black women and single. And that's not good, right? Because I know a lot of educated sisters look good and they got no man. If they are heterosexual. I know a lot of them. And I don't have an answer for them. But one thing that I do, don't jump on me. And they are looking, should I add that part? They are actively looking for men as well. Because they ask me and I'm like, all my friends take them. But, so the thing is, we really need to work on our relationships in general. I think that, collaborating the educational piece with that is very dangerous. Just on a basic level, our relationships need improvement.
Thank you, Brandon. That was a bit controversial. Professor Harris, do you want to respond, or Linda?
Let me unfortunately just add more to the controversy. And I'm all about what's right, but this issue came up a couple of years ago, and actually you can trace this back to the Southern strategy, okay, where a deliberate attempt was made and then executed to take black men out of society. So where we are now, 40 years later, is, to your point, a woman who's educated, got a good job, the middle class lifestyle, whatever. If she wants that same equivalency in a black man, that's if she wants a relationship with a black man, she wants that same equivalency. So, also educated, self-supporting, not in jail, heterosexual, whatever. So everybody take a deep breath. She has a less than 1 in 10 chance of finding that man. So, sisters, I'm not saying this to depress you at all, but it is a reality. And so what we see, of course, is women who are marrying men who don't earn as much or don't have the same socioeconomic status, and that is causing tension. And so we're going to have to, as a community, deal with that. Because back in the day, my mother would tell you, she supported my father while he was working his way through school and stuff, and that was okay. But it's different now. And so we as a community have got to figure out how we're going to do that so that doesn't tear us apart.
Okay. I just want to add that women these days, they're widening their pool for options, right? They're not so necessarily stuck on dating a black man. They'll just want to date a decent man. Right? Just have a question.
Hi, my name is Sharonda York, and my question is, I'm somebody I'm very caring, and I do put myself last, taking care of a lot of people, and you say that we should do that. That's easier said than done. So I was wondering, what strategies do you have to help me catch on, like, okay, Sharonda, if you check in with yourself, are you okay? You helping the whole world out. Are you good? Because naturally, I've been doing this. We've been raised to do this all our lives. Like, how do I change something that I've been raised to do that's been in my whole entire being?
Excellent question. Who wants to take that one, Sam?
Well, first of all, to do that, you got to be quit being afraid of not being liked. Because our community, our survival with this trauma has been about being codependent. That's probably our biggest dependency in our community, is our inability to disconnect from things that ain't good for us in relationships. Okay? Because as survival, as a collective, we had to cut short any kind of friction for the good of the greater good, right? And we see that in our families, we see that in our neighborhoods, and that's why we let certain behavior continue, right? And then if we talk about black women, the setup, okay, that came out the slave quarter, right? We have to get to one of the most loneliest periods of my life is when I disown my family. And that includes my mama. Now I see, ooh, yeah. But my mama was a professional victim due to her trauma. The more I understood trauma, the more I had to get away from her. Now once I got better, I could come back. But that takes a whole lot of bravery to learn how to be alone from the folks in your family so that you can take a better scope of who really is there to help you and who do you have to set limits with. I had to set limits with my mother, send her money but not talk to her, because every time I would talk to her, I feel like shit afterwards, right? And I got tired of feeling like shit. And so I would send money to her. She didn't know that them hundreds of dollars that was coming to her from my brothers was my money, because they didn't have none, okay? And then before she died, luckily before she died, we had the conversation, right? She said, why are you doing? I said, because of this what you doing, mama. Because she talking about, well, I want to come to Tarshel's wedding, but I won't come unless you say it's okay. Your relationship is with Tarshel, not with me, right? If you want to come to the wedding, we'll send you a first-class flight and make sure you got the best dress and everything else, but don't do this to me. And if you want to do this to me, you will hurt her, because I don't care if you come or not. Okay? And she got real quiet, and she says, it's been like that? I said, yes. And we had a long conversation, unfortunately, because of our codependency, and because she disowned us, because my mama learned that if I have trauma and tell everybody my sad story, people would show them love, right? And so she disowned us because we stopped playing that game, and the folks she thought loved her didn't check on her, and she had been dead for 8 days before they found her. And that was 2 weeks after that, right? And so the trauma in my family, I had to disconnect from that to find my own way outside of the Milky Way of the trauma to be able to be okay with me. So saying no is not that hard. And folks who know me know that.
All right, I have a question from this lady, which is earlier on. It's a quick question, and maybe Dr. Peoples, you can answer this. The question is, how can people in this room get access to mental health professionals? Where can they find that information?
So there are a few online resources that list mental health professionals of African descent. So one is the Black Mental Health Resources website, so that's bmhr.info.
It's .info.
So bmhr.info. There are a few organizations that, no, I don't have to do that, but there are also a few organizations that are sort of targeted toward African Americans. So Kente Circle is one in Minneapolis, Breakins Consulting in Minneapolis.
Kobe program in St. Paul throughout. That Builders and Associates is also in St. Paul. There's a lot of people in private practice as well, but if you go to that Black Professionals, what's the website again?
BlackMentalHealthResources.org.
Yeah,
So
most of us are listed on it.
Okay, thank you. We have a question here for a teenager. Very interesting to hear this question. You are a teenager. Okay, good.
So I go to high school, and teenagers, they have their pretty strong opinions. And I was sitting in class one day, and a white student came up to me, and she was like, "Why does Black Lives Matter when all lives matter?" And it was a stupid movement to me. And I asked her, "When you go to the store, did you get followed around?" And she said no. And I was like, "When your brother leaves out the house, do you have to worry about him coming home?" And she said no. So I was like, in order for you to say something is stupid, you should understand it, and you don't understand it. So how would you respond to someone saying that?
Wow. Okay, first of all, you kind of did my job, which is super impressive, given the fact I'm old enough to be your mom. So, I mean, I think you said what needs to be said. All lives do matter, but all lives cannot matter until all Black lives matter. And, it takes a certain sense of bravery. Like, I deeply admire, like, you talking about us not being codependent. It's one thing for us not to take care of our families and for us not to take care of the rest of Black America, but I am confident it is not our job to take care of white America. That I'm sure of, right? And I have no psychology degree, I have no psychiatry degree, but I know that that's not my work. And it definitely, if you were in high school, that is the last thing you should be doing.
Right.
And so when people come to you with that, you need to say, you are not my project. I am not here to educate you. You need to educate yourself, and I have a book for you to read.
Oh boy. I just want to drop the mic. So we have a last question, and I know there's lots of questions, and the panelists will be around hopefully after the event, so you can ask them questions, but we do have to wrap it up and get out of this wonderful space.
First, thank you for letting me be the last question. I'm glad I could get my question in. My name is Jean. I have a 20-year-old son who I believe suffers from depression. And I'm trying to figure out what's some advice on how I can get him to therapy. Because I think if he had that first session, it would make a big difference for him. So what are some words of advice that I could get to start to get him there?
That's a really tough one. Usually what I do when people bring cases like, people bring clients like that, not cases, clients like that to me, is I usually just try to start with a phone conversation with the person, just to try to build some rapport right away. One of the biggest challenges we have, especially with younger Black folks, is getting into therapy. Because when we talked about stigma earlier, and just we don't see enough clinicians that look like us, so we don't even believe that this is something for us in general. And we don't have a lot of information about mental health in general as well, so it's very difficult to get people in. I would try to set up a phone conversation with a clinician to talk to your son. But at the same time, I wouldn't force him. I have a lot of clients that have come to me where their parent or caregiver has tried to force them to do therapy, and that's a bad setup. It doesn't work very well when it happens. Keep promoting it, encourage him. Hopefully he'll come around, but it is very difficult. So yeah, I would just try to connect him with somebody and at least start with a phone conversation to see if you can get him in.
Excellent. So unfortunately we have to bring the panel discussion to a close. Please join me in giving a hearty round of applause and standing appreciation for our panelists, Professor Harris, Linda Long, Dr. People, Sam Simmons and Brandon Jones. Thank you very much. That was a very liberating discussion.